The salt in the air clung to my skin as I stood on the bluffs overlooking Havenport, the little coastal town I'd called home my whole life. Below, the Atlantic churned, its waves crashing against the rocky shore like a heartbeat. I breathed it in, that familiar mix of brine and pine, and felt the world was right. The Havenport Community Center stood just behind me, its weathered clapboard walls glowing in the late afternoon sun. My grandfather had built it a century ago, and every creak of its oak floors carried his stories. I was Elias Kane, architect, dreamer, and the fool who thought this place would last forever. I ran my hand along the center's porch railing, tracing the initials my grandfather had carved, JK 1923. The building wasn't grand, not like the cathedrals I'd studied in school, but it was ours. Kids learned to read in its library, couples danced at its summer socials, and soon I'd marry Clara here under the rafters my family had raised. We'd been planning the restoration for months, sketching new beams, polishing the old chandelier. Clara's laugh echoed in my mind, her teasing voice saying, "Elias, you love this place more than me." I'd grinned and pulled her close, knowing she was half right. That evening, the town buzzed with talk of a meeting at the high school gym. A developer was sniffing around, some big shot from the city with plans for our shorefront. I joined the crowd, Clara at my side, her hand warm in mine. The gym smelled of wax and sweat, and folding chairs groaned under the weight of neighbors I'd known since I was a kid. Mayor Tompkins introduced the man himself, Victor Hargrove. He strode in like he owned the room, all tailored suit and polished smile, his hair slicked back like a movie villain. But his eyes, cold, calculating, betrayed the charm. "Good people of Havenport," Hargrove began, his voice smooth as whiskey, "I'm here to bring progress. Your town's a gem, but it's stuck in the past. My company, Hargrove Enterprises, wants to build a luxury condominium complex right on your shore. Jobs, tourism, wealth, it's all within reach." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I shifted in my seat, my jaw tight. Clara squeezed my hand, whispering, "Easy, Elias." But then Hargrove pointed to a map projected on the wall, and my blood ran cold. The proposed site was our community center's land. He called it a crumbling relic, said it was better off raised for parking lots. My grandfather's legacy reduced to asphalt. I was on my feet before I knew it. "That center's the heart of this town," I said, my voice louder than I'd meant. Heads turned. "It's where we hold our history, weddings, funerals, first kisses. You can't just tear it down for condos nobody here can afford." Hargrove's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. "Mr. Kane, Elias Kane." "Well, Mr. Kane, sentiment's sweet, but progress pays the bills. The center's falling apart. It's a liability." He leaned forward, his tone patronizing. "Surely you, as an architect, understand structural realities." The room was silent, all eyes on me. I wanted to wipe that smirk off his face, but Clara tugged me down, her whisper urgent. "He's dangerous, Elias. I read about him. He ruins people who get in his way." I nodded, but my fists stayed clenched. I thought Havenport would rally behind me. I thought we were untouchable. The next few weeks were a blur of petitions and protests. I organized meetings at the center, rallying neighbors to save it. We hung banners, collected signatures, and for a moment it felt like we were winning. Clara was my rock, though worry lines creased her forehead. "Hargrove's not backing down," she said one night, curled up on my couch. "He's got money, Elias, and friends in high places." I kissed her temple, stubborn as ever. "We've got the town, that's enough." I was wrong. It started with whispers. The mayor avoided my calls. Council members who'd promised support went quiet. Then came the condemnation notice tacked to the center's door like a death sentence. "Structurally unsound," it read, citing violations I'd never heard of. I pored over the documents, my architect's eye spotting lies. No inspections had been done, no evidence provided. Hargrove's fingerprints were everywhere. Night it happened, I was home, sketching restoration plans. The phone rang, and Tom, my old friend who ran the hardware store, was shouting, "Elias, the center's on fire." I don't remember the drive, only the red glow on the horizon, the acrid smoke choking the air. By the time I got there, flames devoured the roof. Firefighters battled the blaze, but I knew it was gone. I stood frozen, watching my grandfather's legacy turn to ash. Clara found me, tears streaking her face, and held me as I shook. The next morning, police were at my door. "Elias Kane, you're under arrest for arson." The words didn't register. They cuffed me in front of neighbors, their whispers cutting deeper than the metal on my wrists. At the station, they showed me evidence, my toolbox, scorched but intact, found in the rubble. My initials were on it. I swore I hadn't touched it in weeks, that it was locked in my shed, but the detective's eyes were hard. "Tell it to the judge." Clara bilayed me out, but her face was a mask of doubt. "Elias, how did your tools get there?" she asked, her voice breaking. I had no answer. We sat in my truck, the silence heavy. "I need time," she said finally, slipping her engagement ring into my palm. She walked away, and something in me broke. In my cell, awaiting a hearing, I stared at the concrete walls, replaying every moment. The center's laughter, my grandfather's voice, Clara's smile, all gone. Hargrove had taken everything. I didn't know how he'd done it, but I knew why. I'd challenged him, and this was his answer. My rage burned, but beneath it was a deeper wound. I'd failed. Failed my family, my town, myself. The hearing came, and the charges stuck. My lawyer warned me a trial could mean years in prison. I sat alone, the courtroom's wooden pews as unforgiving as the stairs from the gallery. Havenport had turned on me, the hero they'd once cheered, now a villain in their eyes. I was Elias Kane, the man who'd burned down his own legacy. And as I looked at the empty seats where Clara should have been, I knew I'd lost more than a building. I'd lost my home. The courthouse steps felt like quicksand as I walked down them, free but not really. A technicality, a chain of custody error with the toolbox had sprung me, but the damage was done. Havenport didn't want me anymore. My architect's license was revoked, my savings drained by legal fees. Clara was gone, her number disconnected, her apartment empty. The town I'd loved, with its salt-worn docks and cinnamon-scented mornings, now turned its back. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. Old friends like Tom muttered excuses and looked away. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting a place that no longer claimed me. I packed what little I had, a duffel of clothes, my grandfather's sketchbook, a photo of the community center before the fire, and drove out of Havenport at dawn. The rearview mirror showed the town shrinking, its lighthouse fading into the fog. I didn't know where I was going, only that staying meant suffocating. I ended up in Port Carver, a gritty city an hour inland, where the air smelled of diesel and despair. I found a job swinging a hammer on a construction site, the kind of work that numbed your mind and broke your body. My hands, once steady with a drafting pencil, now blistered under the weight of steel beams. My apartment was a shoebox above a pawn shop, its walls stained with years of neglect. The radiator clanked like a dying engine, and at night sirens wailed through the cracked window. I'd lie on a mattress that smelled of mildew, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fire. The roar of flames, the crunch of collapsing beams, the cold bite of handcuffs, they looped in my head like a cruel film reel. I saw Clara's face, her doubt cutting deeper than any accusation. I saw Victor Hargrove's smirk, his voice calling the center a relic. He de-orchestrated it all, I was sure, but I had no proof, no power, no plan. I started journaling to keep sane, scribbling in a cheap notebook by the light of a flickering bulb. I didn't burn it. I'll clear my name. I'll make him pay. The words were a lifeline, a promise to the man I used to be. But most days I felt like I was drowning. The construction crew didn't care about my past. They called me new guy and left me alone, but the solitude was its own prison. I'd walk to a corner store for canned soup, passing families laughing, couples holding hands, and feel a pang so sharp it stole my breath. I'd been that man once, with Clara's hand in mine, a future bright as Havenport's summer skies. Now I was nothing. One night I wandered into a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor, its neon sign buzzing like a trapped fly. I wasn't there to drink, not really, just to escape the silence of my apartment. The bartender, a woman with sharp eyes and a streak of gray in her dark hair, slid a glass of water my way. "You look like you're carrying the world," she said, her voice rough but kind. Her name was Leela, and she had a way of seeing through people. I didn't mean to talk, but the words spilled out. The fire, the frame-up, Hargrove's name. Her eyes narrowed at that last one. "Victor Hargrove?" she asked, leaning on the bar. "Big shot developer, I know that name." Leela had been an investigative journalist once before burnout and a bad editor sent her pouring drinks. She'd heard whispers about Hargrove, shady deals, bribed officials, small towns gutted for profit. "He's a snake," she said, "but he's careful. You want to take him down, you need more than anger." Leela's words lit a spark I thought I'd lost. I started visiting the bar after work, not for the watery coffee, but for her stories. She told me about a town called Millhaven, where Hargrove had bulldozed a historic theater after a suspicious flood. Another town, Bayside, lost its library to a gas leak explosion. The pattern was clear. Hargrove targeted community landmarks, erased them, and built his empire on their graves. My rage grew, but so did my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. It was for Havenport, for every town he'd broken. I dug through public records at the city library, my evenings spent hunched over microfilm and outdated computers. Most of Hargrove's deals were buried under shell companies, but I found a thread, A name, Daniel Reese, a contractor linked to the center's fire. He'd been paid through an offshore account tied to Hargrove Enterprises. It wasn't enough for a courtroom, but it was a start. I showed Leela, and she grinned like a fox. "You're not as hopeless as you look," she said. But hope was dangerous. One night as I walked home, a black SUV slowed beside me. Two men in cheap suits stepped out, their faces hard. "Stop poking around, Kane," one growled. "Hargrove doesn't like loose ends." My heart pounded, but I stood my ground, fists balled. They didn't touch me, just laughed and drove off, leaving me shaking in the cold. I knew then Hargrove wasn't just a bully. He was a predator, and I was in his sights. Back in my apartment, I stared at my journal, the pages filled with pain and plans. I wasn't the man who'd left Havenport naive and trusting. I was something else now, sharper, hungrier. Hargrove had taken my life, but he'd made a mistake. He'd left me alive. I closed the notebook, my grandfather's sketchbook beside it, its pages still smelling faintly of charcoal. "I'll clear my name," I wrote one last time, "and I'll bury you." The rusty anchor became my sanctuary, its dim lights and sticky floors a strange comfort in Port Carver's chaos. Leela's bar was where I pieced myself back together, one coffee-stained conversation at a time. She'd lean over the counter, her journalist's instincts flaring as I shared my suspicions about Victor Hargrove. "You're onto something, Elias," she'd say, her voice low, "but you need hard proof. Hargrove's a ghost, slippery as hell." Her words stuck with me, a challenge I couldn't ignore. I wasn't just chasing revenge anymore. I was hunting the truth, and it felt like the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I spent my days hauling rebar at the construction site, my nights buried in research. The Port Carver Library was a concrete bunker, its fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. I pored over old newspapers, property records, anything that might tie Hargrove to the fire that gutted the Havenport Community Center. My grandfather's sketchbook sat beside me, its pages a reminder of what I'd lost. Leela joined me when she could, her sharp eyes catching details I missed. She'd been a bloodhound in her reporting days, and she hadn't lost the scent. "Look for the money," she said one night, tapping a grainy photo of Hargrove shaking hands with a councilman. "It always leads back to him." We started with Daniel Reese, the contractor whose name I'd found in those offshore accounts. Leela had a contact, a hacker named Quinn who owed her a favor. Over greasy burgers at a diner, Quinn slid me a USB drive. "Reese's financials," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't ask how I got it." Back at my apartment, I plugged the drive into my second-hand laptop, my hands shaking. The files showed payments from a shell company, Triton Holdings, to Reese's account, $50,000, wired 2 days before the fire. Triton's address was a P.O. box, but Leela cross-referenced it with Hargrove's known subsidiaries. The link was there, faint but real. My pulse raced. This was no coincidence. Hargrove had paid for the flames that burned my life down. But it wasn't enough. Leela warned me the evidence was circumstantial. Courts would laugh it off without more. So we dug deeper, chasing Hargrove's shadow across other towns. Millhaven's theater, Bayside's library, each disaster followed the same playbook. A sudden accident, a rushed sale, a Hargrove project rising from the ashes. I found a blog post from a Millhaven resident claiming they'd seen Reese near the theater before its flood. Another lead pointed to a city planner in Bayside who'd retired abruptly after a fat bank deposit. The pattern was clear, but Hargrove's name never appeared directly. He was a phantom, insulated by layers of flunkies and fake companies. Leela pushed me to think bigger. "He's not just buying land," she said, sketching a web of connections on a napkin. "He's buying power, councilmen, mayors, even cops." That hit hard. The Havenport police had been too quick to arrest me, too eager to believe I'd torched my own legacy. I remembered the detective's cold eyes, the way he'd ignored my protests. Hargrove's influence was a poison, seeping into every corner of my town. My anger flared, but so did my fear. If he controlled that much, what chance did I have? One night, Leela handed me a burner phone. "Found someone who might talk," she said. "Reese's old crew chief, guy named Marco. He's scared, but he hates Hargrove." We met Marco in a deserted parking lot, rain slicking the asphalt. He was jittery, his cigarette trembling as he spoke. "Reese bragged about the Havenport job," he whispered. "Said Hargrove paid him to make it look like an accident. Your toolbox, he planted it." My heart pounded, but Marco wouldn't testify, too afraid of Hargrove's reach. He gave me a name instead, a lawyer, Evelyn Cross, who handled Triton's contracts. "Find her," he said before vanishing into the dark. Tracking Evelyn Cross was like chasing smoke. Her office was a glass tower in Port Carver's business district, guarded by security and secrets. Leela and I staked it out from a coffee shop across the street, watching suited men come and go. I felt out of place, my work boots and flannel a stark contrast to their polished world. But then Leela spotted her, a woman in her 50s, sharp heels and sharper eyes. We followed her to a parking garage where I slipped a note under her windshield wiper. "I know about Triton. Talk to me." It was a long shot, but desperation made me bold. The next day, my burner buzzed with a text, midnight. "Pier 17, come alone." My stomach churned, but I went. The pier was desolate, the ocean's roar drowning out my footsteps. Evelyn stood under a street lamp, her face half-shadowed. "You're Elias Kane," she said, not a question. "Hargrove ruined you, didn't he?" She didn't wait for an answer. "I've seen his books. Triton's a front. He funnels money through it to pay for accidents. But if you go after him, you're dead." She handed me a flash drive, bank records, emails, proof of payments to Reese and others. "I'm out after this," she said. "Don't contact me again." I barely slept that night, the drive burning a hole in my pocket. At the library, Leela and I opened it. The files were a goldmine, emails from Hargrove to Reese, coded but clear enough to damn him. One mentioned the Kane problem and clean disposal. My blood ran cold. He'd planned to frame me from the start. But Evelyn was right. Hargrove's allies were everywhere. If I went public now, I'd be a target and the evidence might vanish. As I walked home, a car engine growled behind me. The same black SUV from weeks ago pulled up, its window rolling down to reveal one of Hargrove's goons. "You're digging a grave, Kane," he said, tossing a photo at my feet, me leaving the library. "Back off or you won't be the only one who burns." I stood frozen as they sped off, the photo crumpled in my fist. Fear clawed at me, but so did something else, clarity. Hargrove thought he'd broken me, but he'd only forged me into something harder. I clutched the flash drive, my grandfather's voice echoing in my head. Build something that lasts. I would, starting with Hargrove's downfall. The flash drive from Evelyn Cross was a ticking bomb in my pocket, proof of Victor Hargrove's crimes that could either save me or bury me deeper. Every creak in my Port Carver apartment made me jump, expecting Hargrove's goons to kick down the door. Leela's voice echoed in my head. "You've got the truth, Elias, but truth doesn't win without a plan." She was right. Rage had carried me this far, but it wouldn't be enough to topple a man like Hargrove with his web of bribes and bullies. I needed to be smarter, stronger, someone he couldn't predict. So I started building, not with bricks like my grandfather, but with knowledge, grit, and a fire that refused to die. I enrolled in night classes at a community college, a squat building that smelled of chalk and stale coffee. Law and finance, subjects I'd once skimmed in architecture school, became my weapons. I'd drag myself from the construction site, my muscles aching from hauling lumber, and sit through 3-hour lectures on contract law and corporate fraud. My classmates, mostly kids half my age, eyed my calloused hands and faded flannel, but I didn't care. Every page I read, every note I scrawled was a brick in the wall I was raising against Hargrove. I studied how shell companies like Triton Holdings hid money, how men like him bent the law without breaking it. Knowledge felt like power, but it also felt like a lifeline, tethering me to the man I used to be. Leela became my anchor outside the classroom. We'd meet at the Rusty Anchor, her bar now a war room littered with napkins scrawled with leads. She challenged me to stay sharp, to keep my anger from clouding my judgment. "You're not just fighting for you," she'd say, pouring me coffee. "You're fighting for Havenport, for every town he's crushed. Don't let hate make you sloppy." Her words stung, but they grounded me. Late at night, when doubts crept in, I'd open my grandfather's sketchbook, tracing his drawings of the community center. Build something that lasts. I was trying, but the weight of my losses, Clara, my home, my name, threatened to crush me. Physical strength came next. The construction site had hardened my body, but I needed more. I started running at dawn, my boots pounding the cracked sidewalks of Port Carver as the city woke. I joined a boxing gym, a grimy basement where the air smelled of sweat and leather. The coach, a grizzled ex-fighter named Sal, taught me how to channel my rage into precision. "You're not swinging at a bag, Kane," he'd bark. "You're swinging at what broke you." Each punch was for Hargrove, for the fire, for Clara's doubt. My knuckles bled, but I felt alive, like I was forging myself into something unbreakable. The gym wasn't just about fists. It was where I learned discipline, how to take a hit and keep moving. Sal's lessons bled into my planning. I started mapping Hargrove's empire like an architect, sketching his network of allies, councilmen, lawyers, contractors, on a corkboard in my apartment. Leela helped, digging up dirt on his inner circle. We found a weak link. A Havenport councilwoman, Janet Pierce, who'd taken Hargrove's bribes but was rumored to be wavering. If I could turn her, I might get closer to the heart of his operation. But every step felt like walking a tightrope. Hargrove's goons hadn't shown up since the pier, but I felt their eyes, a shadow trailing me through Port Carver's alleys. Then came the bombshell. Leela called me to the bar one evening, her face pale. She'd hacked into a local news site, nothing fancy, just a backdoor Quinn had shown her and found a press release. Hargrove was planning a new project in Havenport, a sprawling luxury resort that would bulldoze half the town, including the docks and the old fishery. It would displace families, erase businesses, and turn my home into a playground for the rich. The announcement hit like a gut punch. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about Havenport's soul. I saw kids playing on those docks, fishermen like my uncle hauling nets, Mrs. Delaney's bakery. Hargrove wasn't just stealing my past, he was stealing their future. That night I slipped out of Port Carver and drove to Havenport, the first time I'd returned since my exile. The town was quiet under a crescent moon, the charred skeleton of the community center looming like a ghost. I parked a block away, heart hammering, and crept to the ruins. The air still smelled of ash, sharp and bitter. I knelt in the dirt, my fingers finding something hard, a charred photo of my grandfather, his arm around me at the center's 75th anniversary. I was 10, grinning like the world was mine. Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't just grief. They were fuel. I tucked the photo into my jacket, a vow to my grandfather. I'd save what was left of his legacy. Back in Port Carver, I told Leela about the resort. Her eyes blazed. "This is your chance, Elias. Hit him where it hurts, his wallet, his reputation." We brainstormed over whiskey she refused to let me drink. The resort's permits were still pending. If I could expose Hargrove's crimes before they were approved, I might stop the project. But it meant going back to Havenport, facing the town that hated me. Leela saw my hesitation. "You're not that broken man anymore," she said. "You're ready." She was right. The Elias who'd left Havenport was a wreck, but this one was different. I'd studied law to unravel Hargrove's schemes, trained my body to withstand his threats, and sharpened my mind to outwit him. The flash drive, Marco's tip, the photo, they were pieces of a blueprint, and I was finally seeing the design. Hargrove thought he'd crushed me, but he'd only built me stronger. As I taped the photo to my corkboard next to names and dates and dollar amounts, I felt a shift. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a threat. I stood in the shadows of Havenport's town square, my breath fogging in the crisp autumn air. The town hadn't changed much in the year I'd been gone, same cobblestone streets, same flickering street lamps, but I had. I wasn't Elias Kane, the disgraced architect, anymore. I was a ghost with a purpose, slipping back under a new name, Ethan Cole, consultant. The burner phone in my pocket held Evelyn Cross's files, Marco's tip, and a plan that could either save Havenport or destroy me. Victor Hargrove's resort loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to erase my town's heart. I wasn't here to mourn, I was here to tear his empire down. Leela had prepped me for weeks, her bar counter a war room of hacked emails and napkin sketches. "You've got the evidence," she'd said, "but Hargrove's untouchable unless you hit him publicly where he can't squirm away." The flash drive burned with proof. Bank records tying Triton Holdings to the community center's arson, emails ordering the Kane problem solved. But exposing him meant infiltrating his world, and that started with getting close to his allies. I'd learned enough law to know the weak points in his deals, enough finance to trace his dirty money. Now I needed Havenport's trust, or at least their ears. I rented a cheap room at a motel outside town, its neon sign buzzing like my nerves. My first move was reconnecting with Tom, my old friend who drifted away after the fire. Leela's digging revealed he now worked for Hargrove, managing construction bids for the resort. Guilt ate at him. I'd seen it in his texts, hesitant replies to my burner's cryptic messages. I met him at a diner, my baseball cap low, heart pounding. He looked older, his laugh lines deeper, his eyes avoiding mine. "Elias," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here, they'll kill you." I pressed, keeping my voice steady. Tom glanced around, then leaned in. "Hargrove-esque got everyone, cops, council, even the mayor. I didn't know about the fire, I swear." His voice cracked, and I believed him. I slid a photo of the charred community center across the table. "Help me stop him, Tom, for Havenport." He stared at the photo, then nodded, a spark of the old Tom flaring. He agreed to feed me intel, permits, schedules, names of Hargrove's inner circle. It was a start. Next, I targeted Janet Pierce, the councilwoman Leela flagged as wavering. Her vote could stall the resort's permits, buying me time. I posed as a consultant for a rival developer, using my night-class polish to talk her language, zoning laws, environmental impacts. We met at a coffee shop, her nervous fingers tapping her mug. "Hargrove's pushing hard," she admitted. "He helped my campaign, but this resort, it's wrong." I nudged gently, planting doubts about Hargrove's ethics without revealing my hand. I left her a folder, anonymous, typed, detailing Triton's shady deals. Her eyes widened, but she didn't push back. Another crack in Hargrove's armor. The real prize was Hargrove's Gala, a glitzy event to unveil the resort's plans to Havenport's elite. It was in a week, hosted at the Cliffside Manor, a mansion overlooking the sea. Tom got me a catering gig, fake ID, black tie, no questions. Leela hacked the guest list, confirming key players, the mayor, council members, and Hargrove himself. "This is your stage, Elias," she said over a late-night call. "Expose him there, and he's done." We planned meticulously. I'd smuggle a USB with Evelyn's files, hijack the gala's projector, and broadcast Hargrove's crimes to his own crowd. Risky, but public humiliation was the only way to break his grip. Leela wasn't done. She tracked down the arsonist, Daniel Reese, through Quinn's network. He was hiding in a rundown trailer park, paranoid and broke. We drove out at midnight, my knuckles white on the wheel. Reese was a wreck, twitching, chain-smoking, but he caved under pressure. "Hargrove hired me," he slurred, eyes darting. "Said to make it quick, frame you." I recorded every word on my burner, Leela's steady hand keeping the phone hidden. Reese wouldn't testify, but his confession was dynamite, another piece for the gala's bombshell. The days before the gala were a blur of preparation. I memorized the manor's layout courtesy of Tom's blueprints. Leela coached me on blending in, how to carry a tray, nod deferentially, disappear in plain sight. But doubts gnawed at me. What if the projector failed? What if Hargrove's goons spotted me? I'd seen their SUV prowling Port Carver again, a reminder of their threat. Leela saw my fear and gripped my shoulder. "You're not alone, Elias. You're doing this for your grandfather, for Clara, for everyone he's hurt." Her words steadied me, but Clara's name stung. I hadn't seen her since the fire, hadn't dared reach out. Was she still in Havenport, still hating me? The night before the gala, I drove to the community center's ruins, needing to feel the weight of why I was fighting. The moon lit the blackened beams, and I knelt where I'd found my grandfather's photo. I pulled it from my jacket, its edges curling. "I'm close," I whispered, as if he could hear. The wind carried the sea's salt, and I felt him with me, urging me forward. I wasn't just avenging myself. I was rebuilding his legacy, brick by invisible brick. Back at the motel, I loaded the USB with everything: bank records, emails, Reese's confession. Leela had formatted it to autoplay, a slideshow of Hargrove's sins. I practiced my moves, slip into the AV room, swap the drive, walk away. My boxing gym training kept my hands steady, my law classes kept my mind sharp. Hargrove thought he'd crushed me, but he'd underestimated the man I'd become. As I lay on the motel's lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, I saw the gala unfolding. The crowd's gasps, Hargrove's face draining of color, Havenport waking up. Tomorrow I'd walk into his world, a nobody with everything to lose, and I'd make sure he fell. The Cliffside Manor glittered under a starlit sky, its chandeliers casting golden light across Havenport's elite. I moved through the gala in my borrowed waiter's uniform, a tray of champagne flutes balanced in one hand, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. My pulse thrummed like a drumbeat, but my face stayed blank, a mask honed by months of boxing and planning. Victor Hargrove stood at the center of the room, his tailored suit and easy laugh commanding the crowd. He was pitching his resort, a gleaming future for Havenport, while I, Elias Kane, the man he'd framed, slipped through his world like a shadow. Tonight, I'd turn his spotlight into a noose. The Manor's ballroom was a maze of crystal glasses and fake smiles. I spotted familiar faces: Mayor Tompkins, Councilwoman Janet Pierce, all sipping Hargrove's wine, nodding to his promises. Tom, my old friend, lingered near the stage, his eyes flicking to me with a subtle nod. He'd got me in, but the rest was on me. Leela's voice echoed in my head. "Make it public, Elias. He can't hide from a crowd." The AV room was my target, tucked behind a velvet curtain near the projector. The USB held everything: Evelyn's bank records, Reese's recorded confession, emails proving Hargrove's arson plot. If I could swap it into the projector, his empire would crumble before dessert. I weaved through the guests, my tray a shield. My heart stopped when I saw her, Clara, standing by a window, her auburn hair catching the light. She wore a navy dress, her face distant, working for a rival firm now. Our eyes met, and for a moment I was back in Havenport's community center, her hand in mine. She frowned, like she recognized me despite the fake name and shaved beard. I turned away, my chest tight. I couldn't afford distraction, not when I was so close. But her presence shook me, a reminder of what Hargrove had stolen. I reached the AV room, a closet of wires and blinking lights. The technician was distracted, flirting with a guest. I slipped in, my hand steady from Sal's boxing drills, and swapped the USBs. Leela's formatting would do the rest, autoplay when Hargrove cued his resort promo. I was back in the ballroom in seconds, blending into the crowd, my tray empty. Hargrove took the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Havenport's future." The projector hummed, and I held my breath. The screen flickered. Instead of glossy resort renderings, Evelyn's bank records flashed up, wire transfers to Daniel Reese dated before the fire. Gasps rippled through the room. Hargrove's smile faltered as an email appeared, his own words. "Handle the Kane problem, make it clean." Then Reese's voice, slurred but clear. "Hargrove paid me to burn it, said to frame Kane." The crowd erupted, murmurs turning to shouts. Janet Pierce stood, her face pale, clutching the folder I'd given her. Mayor Tompkins looked like he'd seen a ghost. Hargrove slammed the podium, yelling for the projector to be cut, but the tech fumbled and the truth kept playing. I stayed in the shadows, my heart pounding. Guests turned on Hargrove, their questions sharp. "Is this true? Did you frame Elias Kane?" He tried to laugh it off, calling it a prank, but his charm was gone. Tom stepped forward, his voice loud. "I saw the payments, Victor. I handled your bids. You lied to us all." The betrayal in his tone cut through the room. Hargrove's allies began slipping toward the exits, their loyalty evaporating. I could have left then, let the crowd finish him, but I needed more. I slipped through a side door to the Manor's terrace where Hargrove fled, his face flushed with panic. He didn't see me at first, muttering to himself, fumbling with his phone. I stepped into the moonlight. "Hello, Victor." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" "Elias Kane," I said, my voice low. "The man you framed." His face drained of color, but he recovered fast, sneering. "You think this changes anything? I own this town." I stepped closer, my boxing stance subtle but ready. "Not anymore. Your money's gone, your allies are running, and that drive's already with the feds." It was a bluff. Leela was still copying it for the authorities, but he didn't know that. Hargrove laughed, bitter. "You're pathetic, Kane. What you think this gets your little center back? Your girl, she left you, didn't she?" His words cut, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned control in that gym, in those law books. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about Havenport. You burned their heart. Now they know." He lunged, not with fists, but with a desperate offer, a briefcase of cash stashed in his car. "Take it, disappear," he hissed. "Last chance." I pulled out my burner, already recording. "Keep talking, Victor." His eyes widened as he realized his mistake, and he backed away, cursing. I let him go, knowing he was done. The crowd's outrage would bury him, my evidence would seal it. As I slipped back into the ballroom, Clara caught my arm. "Elias," her voice trembled, her eyes searching mine. "Is it true you did?" I nodded, unable to speak. She touched my hand, a fleeting warmth, then let go. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to say more, but sirens wailed outside. Leela's contact at the sheriff's office tipped off with the drive's copy. Hargrove was cornered. I stepped into the night, the sea air sharp. The gala's chaos faded behind me, but I felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve. Hargrove's fall was just the beginning. I'd exposed him, but Havenport was still broken. As I walked toward the town square, the community center's ruins waited, a shadow of my grandfather's dream. I'd won this battle, but the war for my home was far from over. The morning after the gala, Havenport buzzed with a pulse I hadn't felt in years. Victor Hargrove's arrest hit the news like a tidal wave, his mugshot plastered across local papers, his resort plans scrapped. I stood in the town square, the sea breeze sharp, watching folks gather near the community center's ruins. My evidence, delivered to the sheriff by Leela's contact, had sealed his fate: arson, fraud, bribery. The feds were digging into Triton Holdings, and Hargrove's empire was crumbling. I'd done it, not for revenge, but for justice, for my grandfather's legacy. The town's eyes had shifted. Where they once saw a criminal, they now saw Elias Kane, the man who'd fought back. Mrs. Delaney hugged me, tears in her eyes, and Tom clapped my shoulder, his guilt replaced by pride. We rallied at the diner, sketching plans to rebuild the center. I offered to design it pro bono, my architect's heart beating again. The community pitched in donations, labor, hope. The ruins weren't a grave anymore, they were a foundation. Clara found me at the site one evening, the sunset painting the charred beams gold. She wasn't the girl I'd lost, nor I the man she'd loved, but we talked. "I should have believed you," she said, her voice soft. I shook my head. "You were hurt, we both were." We parted as friends, a quiet closure that let me breathe. I didn't need her love, just her respect, and I had it. Leela and I met at the Rusty Anchor, her grin fierce. "You did it, Elias." We toasted with coffee, planning a nonprofit to protect historic sites from men like Hargrove. She'd found her fire again, and I'd found my purpose. The center's groundbreaking was set for spring, and I'd be there, pencil in hand, building something that lasted. I visited my grandfather's grave, the photo from the ruins tucked in my pocket. Kneeling, I traced his name in the stone. "I kept my promise," I whispered. The wind carried the sea's salt, and I felt him with me proud. Havenport was healing, and so was I, but as I stood, a news alert pinged my phone, a corporate giant eyeing Havenport's docks for a new project. My jaw tightened. I'd fought one battle, but another loomed. I tucked the photo away, ready to defend my town again.